Good morning and welcome to the Trust Matters webinar. Today, our topic is back to office and the fact that trust is a two-way street. So let's dive right in. Just as a reminder, for those of you, it's your first time joining us, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with those of you who signed up to attend. You'll receive a link to the recording, the presentation, and additional resources tomorrow. And the presentation today is going to be 30 minutes long. We'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. And if something comes up while you're watching us talk, feel free to put it in the chat, or since we have a relatively small group today, just come off mute and ask your question. Turn your cameras on if you're game. We'd love to see your smiling faces today. Most importantly, have fun. This is an interesting topic that Jeff and I have really been excited about talking about now for the last couple of months. So we hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as we enjoy talking about it. For those of you who don't know us, we are Trusted Advisor Associates. I'm not stumping for our books or our services. I just want to point out that where we come from, our perspective on trust, has its roots in the trio of books, The Trusted Advisor, Trust-Based Selling, and the Trusted Advisor Field Book. We focus entirely on trust, and for over 20 years, that's all we've done with our clients, helping professionals just like you build stronger trust relationships. If you have any questions or you're interested in learning more about what we do, please reach out to us. We'll make sure that you have our contact information at the end. So before we dive into our content, I want to do some quick personal introductions. My name is Noelle Michaelenko. I'm the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates. I've been working in the area of trust for coming up on 15 years now. Unlike a lot of people who have been brought into this, I actually started out as a client. So 15 years ago almost, we hired Trusted Advisor Associates at a company where I was a partner in a consulting practice. We brought them in to talk about, to help us understand how we could build deeper trust relationships with our clients. Fast forward almost a dozen years, and when I left my corporate role, Trusted Advisor Associates was the first phone call I made. So I'm excited to be here full time. Joining me today for this session is Jeff Snavely. Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, Noelle. Yeah, my name is Jeff Snavely. My company is Millicare Floor and Textile Care. So, we take care of the floors and textiles for our customers in commercial office spaces. I clean floors for a living. I proudly clean floors for a living, right? But my experience with trust and Trusted Advisor Associates has been it's been a really, really cool journey for me. I'm one of those people that thought I knew everything there was to know about trust many, many, many years ago. And then once I met Noelle and started this journey with Trusted Advisor Associates and becoming an associate facilitator, I realized that, that saying about knowing enough to be dangerous, I knew enough to be dangerous, but I still had a lot to learn, and I'm continuing to learn. And but I'll tell you, what I believe about the role of trust and trustworthiness in all of our relationships. I've never been more passionate about its importance and the role that it plays. So we're going to talk about that a lot today.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Kathy, can I ask you to just pop yourself on camera briefly so people can see your smiling face? Kathy Thomas is our producer for today's session. If you have any technical issues, you can't see the slides, or you're having trouble with your audio, you can direct message Kathy via the chat, and she can help you out in the background. So let's dive in. I want to start off with just getting a sense of why you're here today and what your role is. So if you would please open up the chat window. You can see it. It's the little conversation icon in your in your control tray. And just add into the chat, what is your role in the workplace experience?
Yeah, and as folks are doing that, I mean, we really, and I think we mentioned this as we were sort of putting this webinar out there, we want this to be a very practical, dare say tactical learning experience. And it's really about all the things that we're going to talk about. How do we collectively and you individually bring these concepts to life, and translate learnings into action plans? And I think for Noelle and I, a helpful context is to know what your role is in the workplace, and how you view the workplace experience. So if we understand that, I think it really helps us to sort of guide the conversation in that way, so that learnings can get translated into actionable next steps.
So we've got a shy group of people here, Jeff. To build on what you're saying there, that when we think about the workplace experience, and a lot of this is, it comes from the reason that we're having this conversation to begin with, that there are people who are very, very polarized when it comes to what is the role of the employer with regard to returning to the office, and what's the role of the employee. And within both of those groups, we see further divisions: those that are pro returning to the office, those that want people to have full flexibility to work from wherever they want to. And so understanding the first step in understanding our role in returning to the office, I think, is getting our hands around what is our role in the workplace itself, right? So Mike, thank you for sharing that. Jeff and I were on your podcast recently, so it's great to have you here. And you're really focused on what are the ways that the workplace can be set up to engage people in a really meaningful way. And you raise a really good point, which is that a lot of the return to office conversation is around the operations of returning to the office. And there are definitely logistical concerns. HR functions are scrambling to find policies and processes that support a broad range of work preferences. And managers are struggling with, what does it mean to be fair when I have some people who want to be in the office, some people who don't, and I have to manage getting that team together, right? These are all very real challenges, but they tend to be more operational. Today, we want to focus in on the role of the employee and the employer in making return to office work. So Steve, I am excited to have you join us today as well. I know you're somewhat familiar, at least, with our content, but we're going to introduce you to some concepts that we haven't spoken about. So if we look at what's going wrong in the conversation around return to office, and Jeff and I have been talking about this now for a couple of months, but I've also been looking through what's out there on the internet. There are some amazing blog posts. There are some amazing videos, really great articles, pros and cons for should we be returning to the office or should we not? And I believe that what's really going wrong with the whole conversation about returning to office is that we're asking the wrong question. We're starting off with a question of, is it right or is it wrong? And acting like that can be applied to everybody that's affected by this. And that naturally sets us up for this incredibly polarized zero-sum game. If I give anything, then I'm losing something. If I don't get something from them, then I'm the one who's hurt. Everybody's talking about it, at least, from a position that's really founded in their own self-interest. I want the flexibility that I have. Or employers are saying, we need to have everybody in the office because it's fair, or because we need the innovation, because we need to be able to serve our customers, right? And only looking at those positions of self-interest only gets us so far. It doesn't leave us the ability to find common ground. The third thing that I've seen in my perusal of the discussions out there is a lot of false arguments, or if they're not false, they're maybe extrapolated to a non-logical conclusion. In other words, somebody who says, I am more productive at home, therefore I want to be able to work at home all the time, also probably is supportive when we talk about, but there are limits as far as how much innovation I can get to, how collaborative I can be. Right? The very same people who are saying that they don't want to be back in office are also recognizing that operating individually, remotely from everybody else, limits other things than their productivity. So I think as we start looking through what's real and what's perceived, getting to the heart of not only the reality of the situation, but the reality of what's important for each of us is going to be critical.
Hey, Noel, can I add a little bit to that? I
Jump
think
right in.
yeah, you framed that up so wonderfully. The first two bullets in particular, this idea of a zero-sum game, first of all, because there's so many of those out there these days. I mean, in the workplace and beyond. But this idea of like any situation has some form of scarcity, like win-lose. So what's good for me is going to be bad for you, right? So it's all about me. Or the flip side of that is what's good for you has got to be bad for me. So it's all about you. Well, none of those are sustainable. I mean, both of those scenarios, I mean, ultimately, anytime a scenario has the word lose in it, it's not sustainable, right? Which sort of feeds into the positions of self-interest, because, trying to find those proverbial win-win scenarios, I mean, that's really what it's all about. And what you're saying is, let's make this about us, where things that are good for me are also good for you, right? And let's try to really dive deeper into those things and build on them, and try to find those 1+1=3 situations. So it's not about scarcity. It's about, us coming together in a way that instead of a zero-sum game, the sum of the parts is greater than the whatever that cliche is. And then with false arguments, that can look a lot of different ways. There's bad information out there. There's a lot of spin going on, and I think we see that a lot in the return to office discussions, where there's research, there's data, there's studies that say a certain thing. Well, is that really what it says? Or is that your interpretation? When you can take the same set of data and talk about it in multiple different ways, that's where interpretation becomes very, very, very important. Interpretation is one thing, but then spin is another. And that spin sort of feeds into the win-lose, lose-win situation. And I think that, those type of arguments we really want to try to avoid, and that'll help us stay away from those zero-sum game scenarios. So anyway, just wanted to throw that in there.
Great clarification. Thank you very much, Jeff, for adding that in. So the question leads us to, if what's happening today is going wrong, how do we make it right? Right. And I think a lot of the answers to what's challenging has to do with trust, because trust puts us in a position where immediately, to your point, we're not pushing against the other person. We're not tugging to try to get what it is that we want out of the situation. Trust is the lens through which we get to that additive 1+1=3 situation. So I want to frame this specifically in the context of the 4 trust principles. Now, the 4 trust principles, we usually share this with people in our workshops as a set of guideposts for actions, right? It's kind of a mindset. If we walk in thinking about these principles, we are naturally predisposed towards the behaviors that build trust, right? Towards those collaborative, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts kinds of situations. And the 4 trust principles are really straightforward. a focus on the other for the other's sake, not as a means to our own end, a collaborative approach to relationships, a medium to long-term relationship perspective, not a short-term transactional focus, and a habit of being transparent in all things except where injurious or illegal, right? So what stands out for you when we talk about the return to office with these principles? And while on the surface, they may seem very motherhood and apple pie, when we actually start digging into the reality of the situation, things get a little bit murkier. For example, focusing on the other for the other's sake. Well, we've already talked about the fact that this is a very polarized conversation. Each side wants what they want, and they're dug in on getting that, to the degree that companies are firing people for not coming back to the office. And workers are saying, I'm going to go work for another company if you make me come back to the office. Right. And to Jeff's point, those diametrically opposed views rarely allow to find that common ground. So if we think about focusing on the other for the other's sake, it allows us to just shift our lens. It doesn't mean that we have to give up on what we want. It doesn't mean that what we want isn't right. All it means is being open to recognizing what's in it for the other person. And is there some way that I can still be true to my own values and help them get what they want? Right? Same thing when we look at the other three. Collaboration. We're going to be collaborative in this. Well, I think anything that has one side or the other in a discussion stating this is as far as I'm willing to go, there are no choices, that takes collaboration off the board entirely. Now, again, I'm not saying that everything has to be decided by a committee of 100,000. That's just not practical. But looking for ways to find collaboration within the discussion is really critical. Medium to long-term relationship perspective. It's easy to look at this as a point in time challenge. I have real estate that's open and available. I have workers who have not moved back into that real estate. This is it, make or break. Everything has to happen now. If we expand that time horizon, if we think about everything that's come before this moment with our employees, all the benefits that we as employees have had working for a company for years, and we think going forward, this wasn't normal to us 3 years ago. Now it feels normal. We can be adaptable and we can change into the future. Just the broadening of that relationship perspective opens up so many new avenues. And then finally, a habit of transparency. And transparency is more than just telling people what you want them to know. In fact, it's kind of the opposite of just telling people what you want them to know. And it has two components to it. One is not holding things back, right? If there's a policy and there's a business reason behind that policy, there's not an employee-focused reason. Again, it doesn't mean that it's bad. And it's condescending to hide that from employees. It's condescending to assume that they will not recognize that a business has reasonable needs in order to be an ongoing concern. And similarly, it's not just about being open about everything, but it's being fully honest about everything, right? If I'm an employee and I've grown to enjoy the flexibility that working remotely gives me, then if I just go in and say, I want to work remote because I'm more productive, that's not fully transparent. There may be some kernel of truth in it, but a more transparent answer would be, I want to have the flexibility that I have when I'm working remotely, right? So on the surface, these seem pretty simple, but they can get complex as we dig in. What stands out for you? Feel free to come off mute, talk about how you see these trust principles, or just type into the chat what's standing out for you. And Jeff and I are going to go through, we're going to give you 6 tips for employers based on these principles and 10 for employees to help ease this transition back. But
Hi,
before
Deb.
we do that,
Hey, Vicky, how are you?
hey, Vicki,
Hi, sorry I was late.
glad
Oh,
to
yeah.
have you here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to chime in because I was at the Hunt Valley Business Forum, which is why I was late. And one of the big conversations we talked about was the lack of communication that is causing the ineffectiveness of any kind of transition and any kind of developing any trust relationship, because there is that lack of communication. And not only, and at different levels, where too often the rules or the mandates come down from the president or the top down instead of from the lower level managers. And the people on the lower floors, they don't care what the president's going to say because they don't interact with the president. They want to hear from the person who they directly work with. And I think that it was my big takeaway from this, was like the people on the floor are the ones that really need to be communicating the changes and building those relationships.
So, Vicky, I'm curious to understand that a little bit more. Lack of communication, is that the amount of information being shared, or is it the content of the type of information being shared, or both? So are people saying, hey, we're not hearing enough, or we're not liking or understanding what we are receiving?
It's a little combination of both. There is a tendency to, in the upper management, feel the need for less transparency and holding back what you really feel.
Okay.
You don't want to admit that, well, I want you here just because I do, or just because you personally believe that it's better for the company. You don't want to admit to that. So you come up and you make stuff up as, oh, we don't think you're working hard enough at home. We don't even, wait, honestly, and from a legal perspective, we have no idea. We have no idea if they're working hard at home or not. We just know that the very specific tasks you're giving them are getting done, but all the other stuff that takes place in a normal day, we have no idea when they're doing that, whether they're doing it at home or doing it in the office. So there's a lack of being willing to completely open up and say, this is the real reason.
Yeah. And it's the difference between positions and interests, right? Like with a policy, you could say, we need you in the office 3 days a week. That's a position. But the interest behind it, that's what really needs to be shared. That's where the transparency comes from. It's like, what are we trying to achieve together? That can only happen if we're in person for a certain amount of time or certain number of days, right? And I think by having those conversations, what you really find out, it's not so much about the number of days or the number of hours. It's about the substance and the quality of the interactions that take place. And what employers are really saying is that's only going to happen if we're together. That being in person has a certain invaluable value, if there is such a thing, right?
Absolutely. And it's been a challenge, I think, in those industries where you never thought it could happen. You never thought that working remote would be a reality. So for those that figured out, oh, I can do this, and the staff will tell you, oh, I get just as much done at home. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. But it's hard to say, we don't believe that, or there's like, well, I'm doing it now, so why can't I continue to do that? And no one wants to give them a real reason why. So again, and I do think it comes back down to that whole trust thing. If we tell the truth, they'll leave.
And Vicky, what you're saying ties in closely with what Steve just put up in the chat, which is, it feels that the more engaged employees are having an easier time transitioning back to the office, right? And it's because it's our number one tip for leaders, other than, by the way, lead by example, which I didn't even put at the level of a tip, because I think that's kind of a tautology. Leaders must lead by example, but make in-office time valuable. And in order to make the in-office time valuable for employees, we have to understand what they value. So that's also part of your communication. and it connects in with all of these tips, right? And we'll talk through them a little bit and how they relate to the trust principles. Understanding and acknowledging employee perspectives. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. It doesn't mean that there's judgment, that they're right or they're wrong. It does mean that we need to be open to understanding what their perspective is. That can help us make their in-office time more valuable. Right?
One of the things,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sorry. One of the things that I guess a phrase I heard today that I had not heard before was stay interviews. So
say that again.
STAY, stay interviews. There's the exit interview. There's
Right.
the hiring interview. Now there's I guess starting to be a practice of the stay interview, where you interview your employees to, like, what keeps you here, what will keep you here, but they're only effective if you survey people. They want to know what the results of that survey was. So after you survey, you have to actually give the results, and you have to do something with them.
Yeah.
So it serves no purpose to ask the question if you're not going to, tell people what the answers were.
And
I thought that was
Vicky,
pretty cool.
and in talking with you, I think, you do a lot of this informally, right? And I know this from other, contacts in the workplace. Like on any given day, as you're walking around and engaging with employees, you're asking questions around, hey, you're in the office today. How's it going? What's working well for you? What else do you need? Did you see that we've added this, this technology or this experience to our office? Have you tried it? Here's why we did it. Here's how we think it can help with the workplace experience. So I, talk with people a lot that their role has really changed in the last couple of years from a more reactive, fix problems when they happen role to more of a proactive workplace experience manager, of really trying to connect with employees and make sure that when they are in the office, they're getting an experience that they couldn't otherwise get if they weren't in the office. So.
Right. Big believer in the MBWA, management by walking around.
Yes. Yes. And then there's an engagement component to that as well, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And Vicky, that's why, especially in tips 2 and 3, understand and acknowledge employee perspectives and seek out and acknowledge actionable feedback, right? There are a couple of nuances in both of those. One of them is to acknowledge it, whether that's acknowledging it as in, thank you very much, we are going to collaborate with you to figure out a way to make that happen, or thank you very much, we recognize that, and it's not something we can accommodate. Right. The other thing is this sense of accountability for everybody in the company, leaders and employees, that when they give feedback, and this can be managed through the conversations themselves, but also by being clear what's being asked, right? Again, what do you want is a less actionable question than how can we help you be more successful, or what do you need to be more successful? So that sense, and I know Jeff will be loving this because Jeff is always a super action oriented guy. But that idea that the feedback that you want, yes, it's important to have a pulse of how the employees are feeling. It's also helpful to ask them what you need to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so that actionable aspect comes in.
Yeah, it's not so much what do you want, it's what do you need, or what do we need collectively to get where we're both trying to go. When the circles of your Venn diagram overlap, and we're going to focus on those things together, because we're all trying to get. Everybody wants their company, organization, or firm to be successful, right? And so what does that look like in terms of what's your role, what's my role, but what do we work on together to get where we're trying to go?
I ask the question in all of my reviews. At the end of my reviews, I say to every employee, what can we be doing better to help you do your job?
Exactly.
And is there, and I'll say, is there something you think we could do better as managers? I ask it in every review, because I feel like it's your turn to review me just as much as I'm reviewing you.
Yep.
So.
Now, in this, I think that's a great lead in too to our tips number 5 and 6. One is just giving employees time to adjust. Right. Again, we've been through the huge change that the pandemic caused when everybody went remote. And I know companies have been saying, well, we're giving them time. We let them know 6 months ago that this day was coming. They also need time after the transition.
Yeah.
Right? Because what feels like panic-inducing change today, and I remember this statistic, it's from, gosh, back when I was a teenager and I was working in crisis management, not corporate crisis management, but personal. I was doing intervention counseling with other teams. And somebody told me that a crisis can only exist for a couple of weeks, because our brains kick in and they start to retrain themselves, and human beings are not made to live through significantly high levels of anxiety for a very long time. And so our brains will actually start the healing process with getting used to that. Now, I realize that's a super broad brush to paint with. There are, of course, people who have very realistic wellness concerns about the amount of change they're going through. Companies need to recognize, leaders need to recognize that this is going to take a little bit of time to settle in, that what feels incredibly uncomfortable today is going to feel better in a few weeks. And don't just do one point in time feedback session with somebody, right? Get a pulse check today, get more pulse checks, either formally or formally in a few weeks, another in a few months. Because we're treating this as though it's a point in time challenge when it's really a period of time challenge. And then the final thing for leaders, that transparency. Be transparent with your employees, be open and candid about your own personal views, not in conflict with what the corporate policies are. But the reason that the proclamations from on high don't resonate with the people in the lower floors, like you said, Vicki, right, is because the proclamations aren't personal. Their manager is personal. So be transparent about your own concerns and your own hopes, and not just with your team members, but also back up the chain. Be transparent about what's not working with your leadership, because those leaders, those middle management leaders, are really a linchpin to keep those flows of communication going both ways.
Yeah, and this idea of, like, say for example, hybrid being an operational model, and so if a leader says, okay, well, what does that mean exactly? Like, help me understand what that looks like, or what exactly are you saying? This slide, these 6 points, this, the way leaders lead by example, this is how you bring that idea to life. Like, just because you tell people that they need to be in the office 3 days a week, just being in the office doesn't create this meaningful workplace experience. Doing these things, engaging in this way, having these conversations, for leaders, this is the difference between an operational model of a policy for a number of days or amount of time in the office versus what actually happens when people are in the office, whether it be for 15 minutes or 5 days a week. These are the things that we need to be doing to bring it all to life.
Agreed.
All right. So let's take a look, and let's shift our gears here and look at employees, right? So what are 10 things that employees can do to increase the success of returning to office? And I think the first set of these, really, it's about embracing that partnering mindset, right? Really recognizing that the positive attitude matters. Seeking to understand and acknowledge other perspectives. That is not just a responsibility of the leadership. The employees also have to be open to understanding and acknowledging the realities of the business, what the business needs to keep going and what the business's customers need, right? A business has to be profitable. They have to serve their customer base. And so employees don't get free rein to decide necessarily to design their perfect job. What was it, Jeff? You used a great example the other day when you were talking about, oh yeah, if somebody comes to me and says, well, I want to make $100 an hour for what's a $50 an hour job.
Yeah.
Great. I appreciate you sharing your desire with me.
Yep.
It's not part of the business model.
Yep.
And so again, it's about adapting our own position and what we want with the reality of the situation and understanding the constraints that come with the situation. You want to talk about some of these other ones, Jeff? You want to jump in?
Well, let's see. I mean, to me, mindset is so important, and that idea of a partnering mindset, that's not just a word. There's so much behind partnering. It's a powerful word, right? And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, win, lose, win. I mean, in a partnership scenario, it's got to be win-win, because if we're really partners in the workplace, what's good for me has got to be good for you, and vice versa. And so I think for employees especially, making sure, when you're heading into the office or you're walking through those doors, bringing that mindset with you, especially as you interact with your coworkers. And by the way, this idea of leader versus employee, in a lot of cases, you're wearing different hats at different times, right? Because leaders are employees and employees are leaders. And so, kind of understanding your role in that moment is really, really, really important. So, this isn't like there's one list for this person and one list for that person. There's a lot of this we got to figure out, what situation we're in for that particular scenario. And then, making sure we're bringing these ideas to mind and trying to implement them. But I think mindset is very, very, very important.
Yeah. And what you just said there, Jeff, about the fact that we're in different roles kind of relative to the conversation we're having, right?
Yes.
Like I love that. And it brings me back to that idea that the in-office experience needs to add value, has to add value to the individual, and it has to add value to the organization. And it's not as simple as it's easy to interpret that as it is the company's job to add value to my experience. What if we just flip that around and say, how can I add value to others' experience in the office?
Yep. And,
right?
Yep. And part of that too is, I think, spreading the word. If you have a great experience in the workplace, in the office, share it with people, because this idea of, collaboration only works when we're in person, or only works well when we're in person, whether you agree with that or disagree with that, the more people that are together, the more rich those interactions can be. So by letting people know, I was in the office, it was a great experience. There's a lot of good stuff happening. That can generate some momentum for others to want to be in the office, and then it builds on each other, because all these things that we really believe truly happen at a higher, more impactful level when together. Well, we need more people together to really, spark that type of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that we're in this together attitude.
Yep.
That is so important. And that attitude, again, there's mindset, there's also attitude, right?
Yes.
Think about, when I'm having a really tough day and I show up with clients, I need to put that beside me. It doesn't matter whether or not I want to be there. I'm there with my clients. And what is most important to me at that moment is that they have a fabulous experience. So even if my mindset is somewhere else, I can control my attitude.
Yeah.
Right. Committing to the
Mhm.
success of returning to the office, that attitude of flexibility, and recognizing that just because it feels this way today doesn't mean it's going to feel this way next week.
Wow.
Right.
That's a really
Answer?
important distinction
What? Which
between
one?
mindset and attitude. I like that. That's really, that's important.
Yeah. Look, to me, I feel like mindset, mindsets are somewhat fixed. I'm not saying we can't change our
Yeah.
mindset, but they are a frame through which we see
Yep.
what we're experiencing. We can control our attitude.
Yeah.
We
Absolutely.
can choose to have a good attitude. Charlie Green tells a story, and I absolutely love this story. He was talking to a woman who had recently found out that her husband had been cheating on her. Right. Now, huge emotional impact from this. And he's like, and she seemed pretty okay with it. So he was curious how she got over it. And he's like, well, when did this happen? She said, like 3 weeks ago. And Charlie was dumbfounded. He's like, 3 weeks ago? Like, how are you not just incredibly deep in this? And she said, look, I can, it's in the past. I get to choose how long it affects me. And that to me is such a stark reminder of just how much agency we have over how we interact with the world.
Yeah.
If we're willing to grab hold of that and to own it versus abdicating responsibility for our own attitudes to a series of policies or a bunch of people, like to Vicky's point, that we've never even met.
Wow, that is powerful. It's one of the few things on this planet we really control, right? Yeah. And it's also, I was having this conversation with someone earlier, the difference between fault and responsibility, and something could not be your fault, but that doesn't mean you're not responsible for it, which means what are you going to do about it? Like a policy comes down that you don't like, and you could point the finger and say, well, it's not my fault. Well, but still, it's your responsibility to do something with that,
That's the position most legal administrators are in. We don't make the policies, but we have to enforce them.
Well, it's not just, it's everybody, Vicky, right? I have this conversation in all of our leadership discussions where leaders feel caught in the middle. And they said, what do I do? I've got a policy that's coming down that I may not even agree with, but I have to turn around and play the good corporate citizen. Right? That's a struggle for them. And I love that distinction, Jeff, that just because it's not my fault doesn't mean that I have no responsibility.
Yeah. You know who struggles with that? Teenagers. Yeah, it's something about the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. That doesn't mean we don't keep saying it. We keep saying it.
No, but you're right. You're absolutely right though. But it's like just because you are, something happens to you or something is forced upon you, is how you react to it that matters.
Yeah. What are you going to do about it? Right.
Right.
Like,
that's where your impact is.
Yep.
And that impact will resonate to, if you're in management, that resonates to the people below you, how you react to it.
It's starting to circle back with what Noelle was saying. That's the attitude thing that is totally within our control. So whatever action, you decide is your responsibility, it starts with your attitude, right?
Absolutely. Well, I hate to do this, but I have to jump off because my boss walked by a couple times. Speaking of bosses.
Thank you, Vicki.
But I'm sorry, like I said, this was really valuable, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Vicki.
Thanks. You have a good one.
Bye. Take care. Well, I think with what she was saying just there, Jeff, that it brings us back to that final tip, number 10, right? If you've got the right attitude, if you've really brought your partnering mindset, if you're contributing what you can, and you still can't find it in your heart to return to office, maybe it's time to step down. Right? If where you're working, if where you're going to spend half your life is not, or a third of your life is not doing it for you, then
Right.
the answer may be that it's your time to exit.
Yeah. And
Not
on the
to
surface, you
push
could say,
them
well, that kind of sounds like either win-lose or lose-win. It not necessarily. That can absolutely be win-win, because that decision might be what's best for me, and it might be what's best for my company, my organization. So that's a great one.
All right. Well, listen, we are at time, so we don't have time for Q&A. I do want to understand, though, as you think about everything that we've talked about today, just go ahead and pull up that chat to everybody and think about, what will you do to create a better workplace experience for yourself and others? And while you're doing that, I encourage you to think about your biggest takeaway from our time together today. And again, keep that chat box open. Go ahead and put your biggest takeaway in there for everybody to see. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time. Jeff, it's been another fantastic conversation with you. And we look forward to seeing you again soon in one of our Trust Matters webinars.
Thanks, Noelle.
Have a great day, everybody.